The Indian middle class dream, traditionally known for owning a home, securing a stable job, ensuring quality education for children. Now, this dream is undergoing a huge transformation. While these goals remain relevant to many, the priorities, challenges, opportunities to this segment are evolving rapidly. Why is it that you ask? Well, global exposure, technological advancements, shifting generational values, globalization and digital access have all expanded the horizons of India's middle class, especially amongst millennials and Gen Z. Now, according to a report by the Boston Consulting Group, 72% of middle-class Indians say that their aspirations are shaped by global media, with platforms like Instagram, Netflix playing a huge role in understanding what success looks like. The modern Indian model, the middle-class individual now dreams of international travel, flexible careers, self-actualization as well. Entrepreneurs have tapped into this shift by offering what is now called affordable luxury, a category that bridges aspirations and accessibility. In 2023 alone, India's affordable luxury market grew by 14%, with brands like Zara and H&M reporting over 20% year-on-year growth in small cities, according to the Economic Times. Now, this trend reflects that the middle class's desire to access premium products and experiences while staying within reasonable budgets is surely here. Technology has also played a major role in reshaping middle class dreams. 87% of middle class households now transact digitally. And according to NASSCOM, with apps like Paytm, PhonePe becoming household staples, let's face it, how often are any of us really carrying cash or even our wallets these days? Let's talk about education then, the other big, huge aspect of the Indian middle class. Now, according to the Indian EdTech report of 2023, middle class families are spending an average of 75,000 annually on online courses alone. This accessibility has also fueled consumerism. A report by Reserve Bank of India highlights that credit card spendings reached 1.5 trillion in 2023, with BNPL, remember that? We spoke about it earlier on the program. Buy now, pay later schemes growing at an annual rate of 50%. Let's talk about the younger generation then and what they call successful. According to LinkedIn Workforce Insights, 64% of millennials and Gen Z professionals in India prefer flexible work arrangements over traditional 9-to-5 jobs. No prizes for guessing that. Prioritizing autonomy, work-life balance. Similarly, 58% of this demographic no longer sees home ownership as a priority, compared to about 81% of the baby boomers. Health and wellness as well, in particular, has become an integral part of the middle class aspiration. And according to Statista, spending on wellness and products and services increased by 19% in 2023, with urban households prioritizing mental health, fitness and self-care. All of this means one thing, that the rise of Tier 2, Tier 3 cities as hubs of aspiration is another notable trend. According to Startup India, 45% of new startups registered in 2023 originated from smaller towns, driven by middle-class entrepreneurs seeking financial independence. This entrepreneurial energy reflects the growing ambition and confidence of non-metropolitan India, which is now playing an increasingly vital role in the country's economic narrative. The Indian middle class dream is no longer one-size-fits-all story. It is dynamic, it is multifaceted, the narrative shaped by global exposure, generational shifts, and the opportunities brought by technology and innovation. So the question, is the definition of the Indian middle class changing? Who is the Indian middle class? Is that expanding or shrinking? And if you fall into the category, what are the trends ahead for you? To decode all of this, we've got two very fascinating guests with us on the program this morning. Dr. Gladston Xavier. He is the social researcher and Dean of Arts at the Loyola College in Chennai. He is with us this morning. Good morning. And also with us is Varun Modgill. He is MD and CTO of Cognavi India. Dr. Xavier, if I can... Hi. Dr. Xavier, if I can start with you. We've just tried to piece together different aspects in which the formulation of the Indian middle class mindset really happens. If you had to, in your own words, define the Indian middle class today, how would that go?
Thank you and good morning and happy Pongal from this part of the world.
Yes.
And the Indian middle class definitely has been a transformative group. So there is no static definition of the Indian middle class per se, because this is such a dynamic group. See, when you see, especially in the last 30 years, the change took place in different parts of India with the software industry. I will say the opening up of the economy, 1990 was a game changer. Now from 1990 up to 2000, there was a trend. And at that point, the 1999 recession brought about a major change in how we perceive the economy. And then post 2000, what we see today has also becoming very, very changing. Now, if you look at from 2015 up to now, 2025, the last decade, essentially has shifted the middle class completely from the traditional value systems, traditional way of thinking, traditional way of ownership, value systems. These are all changing constantly. So it's very difficult to define something that's so fluid. Now, the middle class, the way I would define it is the most adaptive group to a sociological trend, to any trend, the most adaptive. It fits in, it's like water. It just kind of fills in the space and then becomes a class by itself. And therefore, what is also happening is there are people who are coming from the poor and marginalized sections to the lower middle class, people from the lower and middle class moving up to the exact middle class itself, and then people who are at the, you could call them as the creamy middle class, moving a little up to the rich, and then the super rich. The rich itself today is defined into like so many different kinds of categories. Now, in the field, from the field, as a social worker, when I'm encountering people, and the literature does support that, what is going on today is people love to define themselves, define their jobs, define their roles, define their homes, define. So they like to be the owners of what they do. That's why today, if you see, especially if you look at the Gen Z workers, nobody wants to employ them. It's difficult to employ them post-COVID because their mindsets are so different. Now they constitute the actual middle class today. And now the urban-rural divide, that's slightly more. It's very, very interesting to see the urban middle
Dr.
class.
Xavier, hold that thought. You've said a lot of things that are so fascinating, and I just want to pick on, all of them one by one. So what you're essentially saying is that the definition of the middle class itself has expanded. More people have got into that segment, but while we all know that moving in from middle to rich is where the real struggle is, that's where it really begins. That is where we are seeing, which is very, very fascinating. Let me bring in also our second guest here, Varun Modgill, on this. Varun, your definition of the Indian middle class, and if you have some numbers perhaps for us?
Thank you, Dr. Gladston. It's quite interesting, his definition. And I do agree with the part which he mentioned that, they're the most adaptive to change. They have to be the most adaptive. And in terms of the definition, they are the most fluid in terms of the changes that are happening. They adapt, and they need to, like the discussion that we are having now, that they have started, you mentioned globalizations or access to payment systems or financial access. I don't have a definition that is different from what he has mentioned.
Sure.
But I agree with him on this regard.
Yeah. But, Dr. Xavier, can I counter what you said by a quote that recently came in? And this is by Nestle, which is one of the largest FMCG companies, MNCs in the world, here in India has a very large footprint as well. And there, the MD there went out to make a statement saying that the FMCG, how they used to operate, has changed because there seems to be, in his own words, a shrinking of the middle class. The ones who are offering fresh to reasonable value in the middle segment are finding their fortunes temporarily impacted as well. Now, if Nestle goes on to say that there is a huge market for premium products, but not so much for the middle class products, is that revision of the definition or is that expansion?
Well, this is aspirational. You see, if you look at how companies are branding stuff, it could be a car company. Take the car company, for example, car segment. Now, about 15 years ago, you would buy a small car, 4 people, like a Santro or a small Maruti or an Alto and things like this. Now, why do we see SUVs, so many SUVs on the road? If you go to the homes of these people, many of them don't have a place to park. There's no place to park. It gives you. These are aspirational. Now, middle class is also very aspirational due to several different kinds of layers of aspiration. The first layer of aspiration is a peer aspiration. The P2P aspiration, peer-to-peer aspiration is very high. Now, when you look at it in terms of jobs, in terms of economy, in terms of saving, in terms of share market, now, most of these middle class people, now they're not buying homes. They're investing in the market. They see that instead of paying EMIs for the next 25, 30 years, it's much better that I invest and then grow. Now, this thinking is new. This thinking is only 10 years old. It's not more than that. And if you buy a home, you'll be spending on rent. They calculate the rent, they calculate the cost-benefit analysis, and they find that it's completely different. But however, sociologically, when you look at, has this brought a change in the caste mindset? Has this brought a change in the communal mindset? Has this brought a change in secularism? No, that's not happening. This is more economic rather than social. The changing is more. That's very, very, very interesting to see.
Yeah.
And also, are people being more critically conscious? Well, if you compare the middle class in India and Finland, you will see there's a clear difference in how the middle class looks at it in India in terms of aspirational, premium products and others. But the middle class in Finland will remain simple, but aspiring in terms of education, jobs, and things like that. I'm comparing Finland because it's one of the most evolved economies, and on the happiness index, they're very high. They're one of the highest in the happiness index. So that's important to see how middle class operates in different countries. In India, just one point over here. In India, when you dissect the middle class and see, going back to the Nestle survey, these market research companies, which I've done research for so many companies, and I can see where they target. The target is that you go to the exact middle class and they are the cusp of change. When you go to the cusp of change, what you do is, what is the watch you're wearing? What is the food you're eating? Where do you eat? How much you spend on food? All these things are what are counted in. And then when you come into the products, people are also going the different way. If you're going to the higher middle class, they are not even wanting to consume these premier products. They want to go organic. They want to go natural. They want to go all these things. That's more premium for them. You know, what is important to understand is, I'm also a farmer. As a farmer, for me, I need to know if I'm doing something organic, the prices should be low. Because I'm not using paid fertilizers. I'm using my own organic vermicompost.
Got it. I like what I want to pick on what you said about this aspiration being one of the mindset and largely economic in nature and not clearly coming up in the form of social evolution as well, if one can call it that. Varun, your thoughts on this, on the definition being largely sort of, what should we say? Should we say it's a middle class syndrome then?
You know, in my case, the way that I look at it is, let's say, based on what a person from Nestle said, that the middle class is shrinking. And what Dr. Gladston said, I think the demand for premium product increase is largely also fed by digital transformations uh, things such as,
Sure.
let's say, ease of ability to pay. For example, earlier people, these are aspirational products that was mentioned earlier, that young people would probably like to purchase higher priced products, and these were not earlier accessible to people, but now with ease of financial sort of accessibility, digital payments, credits, buy now pay later systems that you said, it becomes a lot easier for them to save. The problem with this, though, is that without proper financial literacy, people tend to overspend, or this may, as a result in increased debt. Aspirations are great, but it does have a fragile balance, I think, that it starts to disturb. So earlier, Dr. Gladston mentioned about the car ownership. And it is true. Earlier, people would be okay with smaller cars, and now you see a lot more SUVs that are slightly more expensive. These are largely a result of a global media showcasing SUVs are great, but also because it's easier to actually finance these cars now. Anyone can. AI or technological advancement has made.
So you're saying availability of resources is what is leading to this, which is also fascinating. But Dr. Xavier, if I can come back to you and play a bit of a devil's advocate over here. This is the same middle class we're talking about that complains and complains about taxes being too high. The same middle class, which is part of the 2% and perhaps the only one paying taxes in the country. The only middle class which talks about carrying the burden of the country on their shoulders, being salary earners. So how am I supposed to see both these narratives at one go?
That's an amazing question. You really foxed me in, actually. This is a very interesting question because I've been wanting to take this analysis. Now, just look at the GST. Now, the GST is something which is very important for us all. If you make a cursory analysis of the GST and who pays the highest amount of GST, it's the middle class. Because the consumer, the products that they use, if you look at the 5% up to the 28%, it is the 18% GST that is hitting. And that's where the consumerism is so high. And that's exactly where they want to pay the GST. So now we are not only looking at the taxing, the direct taxes, the indirect tax also comes from this huge part. That's where the middle class is it's the engine of the economy in terms of taxes. Middle class is the engine of the economy. Now, when you look at it, what does the middle class consume? Middle class consumes everything that is produced. There's no real specificity. It's only this I should consume. It's not like that. Whatever is available, whatever is affordable. If I can't afford a Nike pair of shoes, okay, I will afford something slightly lower. If I cannot do that, I can go slightly lower. If I can go higher. Now there's a whole range. The market has opened up. Now that's where the GST has really been successful. Hitting the middle class, levying the taxes there and taking. Now, if you look, then you see in the last few years, last 10 years, more, maybe a little more, the tax bracket has not grown at all. Very marginal growth in the tax bracket. That's why in this budget, people are advocating that you extend the bracket up to 10 lakhs. Now, the creamy layer, if you're in the creamy layer and if you want advantages, the cap is at 8 lakhs. But at the same time, if you are wanting more from the other part, the cap is only at 3 lakhs for tax paying.
But Dr. Xavier, what I'm trying to get at here is that despite being so-called the creamy middle class, one is always middle class in their head. I'm trying to understand is that just a syndrome, like I said? Is it just in the head? Or should we be accepting a very new class and a category altogether?
Now, what will happen is this is undergoing change. Two things that are changing it. One is the post-COVID generation that we are talking about. The alpha is going to change this. The beta is going to throw this out of the window. It's going to completely change.
Through what?
It depends where you are from. From what is it right now? Now, what is going to happen is, now, I'm just going to be the prophet of the doom right here and say, how this is going to change, how it's going to alter it is because there are many self-correcting mechanisms in society. One is the environment. The environment is going to put a major check on the consumerism that we are going. That's the first self-correcting mechanism. If we don't do this, automatically the environment is going to check you. Next is when the middle class keeps expanding, there is lack of equity. Not all middle class people have the same opportunity. Not all the people can aspire for that. That is going to cause a lot of conflict in communities. Countries like the US are now facing it because you see the social conflicts that are taking place in the US. You take the social conflicts that are taking place in Sudan. Two opposites, completely opposites. Now, highly developed, evolved economy, the US, is facing a huge bout of racism, a huge bout of economic struggles. Homelessness in New York, one of the highest in the world.
Yeah,
Now, the same
even
thing in
London.
Sudan.
Yeah.
Yes. You can take, or just for want of comparison, take for example Sudan. The conflict has been raging over there over similar issues, but the identity concept is there. So what is going to happen is, if we don't self-correct, if this is not regulated, if it is not becoming more conscious, the consumer needs to become more conscious, and this consciousness is what is going to turn things around for us.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, when this younger generation comes up, when this beta generation, the next 20 years, 15 years, they change, the things will change completely in the next few years.
Yeah. Okay, I think Varun has a point very quickly. Varun, I have to wrap after that.
Yeah. You know, when we're talking about all these changes right now, a lot of it is to do with, thank you so much for giving me this time. We have to remember that we're talking about a lot of youngsters, all the points that we discussed, whether it is about providing them, all the points that we mentioned are essentially the Gen Z that we are currently talking about, and Professor mentioned about alpha and beta. I think the way forward right now, a lot of the changes that are happening and the evolution that's happening is great. I think it's our turn to sort of start assisting them. You know, we support a lot of students as my profession, and basically, I think it's a time where they are going through a lot of change. It's important for us to pass on this sort of knowledge of maybe providing them financial literacy, or you know, you mentioned about EdTech coming across. We need to mention that they have access to these you know, platforms. We represent a lot of STEM students.
Yeah, but I think, Varun, are you trying to say that the younger generation today is not limited in their head with the thought and the limitations of a middle class? They don't think of themselves like that.
I think so too. You know, these aspirations are not a bad thing, is what we need to teach them. So they can take India to the next level. They're basically taking on the baton from us to take it forward. So we should be looking to support them.
All right, Varun Modgill there and Dr. Gladston Xavier, thank you both for joining us on this very fascinating discussion. Does that mean that we need to redefine classes in the country within the middle class? So many categories. The gap is also widening, so is the definition. Are younger generation going to write a sort of class of their own? Well, all of these things wait to be heard. If you have comments on this, please do write into us with those as well. On that